and good afternoon. My name is Christine Okrat, and it is indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here in Brussels for this event to mark the 10th anniversary of the European External Action Service. And indeed, to do so, we have an extraordinary panel today as we welcome you, Josep Borrell. You are the High Representative for Foreign Policy and Security and Vice President of the European Commission. Hello and good afternoon. My name is Christine Okrat, and it is indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here in Brussels for this event to mark the 10th anniversary of the European External Action Service. And indeed, to do so, we have an extraordinary panel today as we welcome you, Josep Borrell. You are the High Representative for Foreign Policy and Security and Vice President of the European Commission. We have with us Federica Mogherini. You are now the rector of the Collège d'Europe in Bruges, and you were in charge in the same job between 2014 and 2019. And it is indeed a great pleasure to welcome Javier Solana. Hello, good afternoon, Mr. Solana. You are in Madrid. Thank you for being with us. You are now the president of the Center for Global Economics and Geopolitics in Madrid. And you have been in that job for 10 years, from 1999 to 2009, when the Lisbon Treaty decided to merge the external relations with the foreign policy, common foreign policy service. Of course, we would have loved to have Catherine Ashton, Lady Ashton, with us as well, but with the COVID situation currently in the UK, it was not possible. Now, 10 years, a long time, and indeed a tumultuous time to freshen up common memories. Let's have a look at a few extraordinary moments. Javier Solana, let me turn to you first. What of a quick reaction? What is the most memorable moment for you among all of those that we've just seen?
Well, to choose the most memorable moment is difficult. I think that the most important part of our mandate, our time, was to put in place the first capabilities for the European Union to act internationally, collectively, and also outside the European Union for peacekeeping operations. It was the first time that the European Union was outside their borders in peacekeeping operations, and I think that was fundamental. We did about 30 operations in Africa, in the Middle East, everywhere in the world, even in the countries of the Pacific. And that was a really presence of the European Union as an actor. And I think that for me, if I have to resume, the most important part is to put Europe not only as an actor internally, but as an actor externally in a very complicated moments. Remember that we had, at the beginning of our mandate, we have two very important events. One was September 11, that changed the situation in the world. And the second, 2 months later, was the entrance of China in the WTO that changed also the relationship between the world and China.
Mr. Solana, we will have time to, of course, deal in more detail with those very important moments. But let me turn to you, Mrs. Mogherini. Again, the most moving moment for you. The most emotional.
I would say two, if you allow me. First of all, good afternoon, and thank you for doing this. I think it's great. Well, one is the obvious one when we reached the agreement on the Iran nuclear deal. 14th of July, a special day for the French friends, 2015. That night when we achieved, after many years of negotiations that actually Javier started, when we achieved the nuclear deal with Iran, that was a very emotional and important moment. But equally emotional and important for me was when we managed to approve the PESCO decision, the Permanent Structured Cooperation on Defense, with the foreign and defense ministers of the European Union countries. That was also, for me, a very special moment because everybody was saying that it would have been impossible, and we achieved it. And it was, for me, a special moment, following and building on the work that Javier had started back then.
Mr. Borrell, it's exactly 1 year that you're in office. We all know you're an avid, very energetic blogger. In that 1 year, you've commented a lot about what you've done. But again, the most memorable moment so far, just one.
Maybe the first day, when I went to the La Cour des Invalides for the mourning of the French soldiers who were killed in Mali, just the same day that they took in office. It was a good example of how Europeans are engaged to keep peace and to fight against terrorism. And it was moving, certainly.
We now have about an hour or so to discuss what has been achieved by the External Service during these past 10 years, the successes, but also the obstacles, the difficulties, the lessons learned, so to speak. But I think it's also very important, of course, to look to the future and indeed to the present, to this ever-changing geopolitical scene where we see so many different actors, so many different threats. And so it will be, I think, very interesting to ask our three distinguished guests their views about how the European Union can best protect and promote its own interests and its sovereignty. But before that, we need you viewers from all over the world to share your views and to take part in this discussion. Christophe Robert, let me turn to you.
Thank you, Christine, and welcome to the newsroom of the European Council. Indeed, we want the viewers to be part of the story. We want the viewers to be part of this discussion. There are many ways for you to get in touch with us and share your thoughts on the European External Action Service and EU foreign policy. First, you can ask your questions directly to the High Representatives by leaving a message on the EAS social media platforms. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Remember to use our hashtag EEAS10 as 10th anniversary. Meanwhile,
Okay, so yes, the 10th anniversary of the European External Action Service, which is the European Union's diplomatic civil service for professional diplomats representing the European Union. And it was officially began 10 years ago in 2011, sorry, after the Treaty of Lisbon came into effect and was ratified and came into effect. And so this video, which appears to have been produced by the European Union, is commemorating that event. And you saw the reference to Borrell, who is the current High Representative of the Common and Foreign Security Policy of the European Union, and his predecessor, Federica Mogherini, the Italian former foreign minister, who was his predecessor, and before her was Catherine Ashton, Lady Ashton of Britain, who was the first High Representative of the Common Foreign and Security Policy after the Treaty of Lisbon was adopted. But she's not represented she's not there at this video conference that's a year old. Before the official position of the High Representative of the Common Foreign and Security Policy, there was Javier Solana, was the representative of the European Union in foreign affairs, although he was not called the High Representative of the Common Foreign Security Policy, but he was there as the representative of the European Union when the European Union was launched in 1992-93, when Yugoslavia was disintegrating. So when I was in Bulgaria, of course, he was always on the news during the Yugoslav war, as European Union was trying to respond to the escalating fighting in the former Yugoslavia. And he was a very controversial figure, not very well liked, obviously, in Serbia and Belgrade, because one of his jobs was to defend the European Union position on the breakup of Yugoslavia, which was following it came to follow the U.S. NATO lead on dealing with the situation in Yugoslavia, which is good or bad. Maybe it should be controversial. One shouldn't just assume that the U.S. Was an effective actor in that. But the reason why it was controversial is because the United States had decided that among the fighting parties, the fighting groups in the former Yugoslavia, the Serbs, the Croats, the Bosnian Muslims, and the other groups, that the Serbs were mostly responsible. For this conflict. And so Javier Solana was often coming on to the media to predominantly blame or condemn Serbian actions, Belgrade's actions in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So he was not very well liked in Serbia and in the Balkans in general, because he was seen as anti-Serb, basically, rightly or wrongly seen as anti-Serb, which of course Serbia was seen as an ally, tends to be seen as an ally, traditional ally of Russia. And I talked a bit about this in the United States foreign policy class, that that war that led involving the breakup of Yugoslavia was a critical event over 30 years ago, beginning 30 years ago, because it really established America's orientation to the world after the Cold War was over. The Soviet Union is gone. So now what is the United States role in the world? What is the United States organizations that the United States leads, like NATO, international organizations like NATO, the United States leads? And that response to the breakup of Yugoslavia played a critical role in establishing America's view that America should be providing quote unquote global leadership in creating a new world order. And the United States undercut or did not support United Nations and European Union efforts to come up with, to provide leadership in resolving or dealing with the crisis in the former Yugoslavia. Even before Bill Clinton came into office, Bill Clinton became president in January 1993, in lead up to the political campaign that led to him winning the election in November 1992, in order to distance the Clinton from the Republicans and George H.W. Bush, who was president at the time. Bill Clinton, who was vulnerable to charges that he was not a true patriot, that he had avoided fighting in Vietnam when the Vietnam War was happening because he went to Oxford. I think he went to Britain to study to college, and so he, like many American young men, they were able to avoid serving in Vietnam, fighting in Vietnam, in the Vietnam War, if they were in college. You could get a deferment from going to fight in the military. If they're called up to serve in the military, they could get a deferment or delay if they were in college. So a number of men, including him, but other men as well, like George W. Bush, they found ways to avoid going to fight in Vietnam. The point is that, of course, George H.W. Bush, the president of the United States from 1988-89 to 1992-93, who had been Ronald Reagan's vice president, he was the youngest American, one of the youngest Americans to fight in World War II. And he was an Air Force pilot who actually fought in World War II, and his plane was shot down in the ocean. He actually crashed in the ocean. So he had this, George H.W. Bush had this authority of being an American who was willing and actually risked his life to fight for the United States. Whereas people like Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, they found ways to avoid going to fight in Vietnam in the 1960s and 1970s. So Clinton wanted to show that he was a strong American leader who would be willing to take a stern position against threats to the international order that the United States was leading. And he criticized George H.W. Bush administration for not being active enough in stopping the violence in Yugoslavia that was escalating. And there are indications that Bill Clinton indicated, the Clinton administration figures indicated to the Europeans that the Americans were going to be more assertive in condemning, particularly the Serbs. The Serbs were seen by the Clinton administration as more guilty than anybody else. And this reduced the willingness of the other groups like the Croats and the Bosnian Muslims in Yugoslavia to compromise, because they thought that when Bill Clinton became president, that Bill Clinton would not be as willing to allow the United Nations and the European Union under the Cyrus Vance and Lord Owen, the Vance-Owen plan, Cyrus Vance representing the United Nations and Lord Owen representing the European Union. They were trying to organize a settlement of Yugoslavia to redraw the boundaries. Maybe it would not have worked, but the point is that the Clinton administration indicated fairly early, even before they came into office, that they had decided that Belgrade, Serbia was the bad guy, was the primary, not the only, but the primary bad guy. And of course, it's not a coincidence, I think, that, of course, Serbia is a traditional ally of Russia today. And it's still important today. I mean, the Russians are encouraging the Serbs not to compromise regarding Kosovo and the independence of Kosovo. And Serbia refuses to recognize the independence of Kosovo and is buying weapons from Russia. And the Bosnian Serbs are buying weapons from Russia as they attempt to finally separate from the rest of the Bosnian Muslims and the Bosnian Croats, the Croat Catholic group in Bosnia, to try to separate and join to Serbia. Okay, so before I go on, somebody has mentioned that I should make sure I don't forget to do the attendance. So let me do the attendance for the class. So let me go to that and go to Cyber Campus, log in. And so we go to policymaking in the European Union and attendance. And so here we are in week 15, and we add and smart attendance, and your number is 568. 568 is your smart attendance number, 568. So let me put that in the chat, 568. And okay. And that issue of Serbia, the Serbs of Bosnia leaving Bosnia to join Serbia, that's a very timely comparison to what is going on today as we in this latest crisis going on between NATO and European Union on one side and Russia on the other side, with the conflict over the over Ukraine. So here's the let me make sure I can show you this, the screen share, the file, Wikipedia file. This is Bosnia, right? So here, let me scroll down here, and find, let me see, a modern contemporary picture. I think there's a map of Bosnia here. So this is what Bosnia was divided into at the end of the war that ended in 1995. So we have Republika Srpska, which is basically Serbian for Serbian Republic, the Republic of Serbia, and Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which has got the Croats and the Muslims together. They hate each other, but the European Union and the United States made them cooperate so that they could oppose Republika Srpska. So this group, these Serbs here are buying weapons from Russia, and they desire to separate from this thing called Bosnia-Herzegovina and join these territories with neighboring Serbia. Serbia is bordering here, right? And so we can see here, what is this? I think I saw Bosnian. Let me just see what this Bosnian Wars. Let me see what this come up, because there's a Wikipedia entry for Bosnian Wars. So let me see Bosnian War. So you can see, I think you can see that, you know, the war that, you know, people, you know, when I was in graduate school, this was underway. So you can see, you know, the fighting, and this is the map of Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1991. This shows where the intermixed nature of the population here. The blue are the majority areas of Serbs. The orange are the majority area of Catholic Croats, and the green are the majority areas of Bosnian Muslims. And so you can see that this is a very complicated situation. And if of course, if this area were to join with Serbia, of course, there would be Muslims minorities within that area, and they don't want to be Muslim minorities in the Serb Orthodox Christian bigger state. So that was the escalation of the war. And so it describes here, you know, the different plans that were posed to try to prevent the conflict, which was already escalating. You can see here, yeah, somebody being shot, murdered here. Oh, this is very, very, very unfortunate pictures. This is what the Vance Owen plan attempted to do: create some kind of autonomous oblasts where there would not be a strong central government, and it's all very complicated, and it didn't work. It didn't turn out. And so you can see that as what the in the Dayton Agreement, the territory that was controlled by the fighting groups there, and the reason why I'm mentioning all of this is because what's this here? So again, hundreds of thousands of refugees, 100,000 dead people, hundreds of thousands of refugees have moved in this described out of fear and terror in the midst of the war. And let me see, so they can, goes on here and highlights, you know, the horrible fighting, you know, and this is happening in the center of Europe, and the European Union is supposed to be a peace strategy, right? The European Union is supposed to be a force for peace, and the European Union was criticized for not being able to prevent this conflict in the center of Europe from escalating to brutal civil war. But the United States didn't really provide a full support for the European Union, United Nations, when the United Nations and the European Union were trying to take the lead in coming up with a post-Yugoslav arrangement for this territory. And so the okay, so and that's the context for creating the common foreign security policy and strengthening the common foreign security policy of the European Union today, basically to try to increase the ability of the European Union to behave more effectively in and that's the different in dealing more effectively with these kinds of conflicts. But now we have a current conflict which is escalating as we speak. Which, let me go to the again, go to Wikipedia if I can find it here. What comes up if I type in Ukraine war and come up with a map and list of wars in Ukraine? What about the current one? And I'm looking for the well, I guess yeah, since 1991. So well, I guess I'm looking for, well, let's look here, Ukraine. So this, I've shown this before. This is the picture of Ukraine, the Wikipedia entry for Ukraine, which I think is a little bit, you know, it's a Ukrainian patriot made this film. So they want to highlight how Ukraine has got a glorious golden age and it has a history of independent state, which is very problematic. So I've shown you this map before. And so you can see, you know, this territory was added to Ukraine in 1954 by Khrushchev when he was a dictator of the leader of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. This territory was added at the start of World War II when the Soviet Union invaded Poland and took this territory from Poland and added it to Ukraine, and other territories drawn. And the center place of Ukrainian nationalism is here, right? In this area is where you have the strongest Ukrainian nationalists. It's also not coincidentally where you have the concentration of Ukrainian Catholics. These people tend to be Orthodox. They're Ukrainian Orthodox or Russian Orthodox, but this is the capital. This is the center for Ukrainian nationalism. So this is, and let me see if I can go back to. Let me type in. Let's see what comes up when I type in this Viv. Right. This is the. I think you can see that. Let me make sure I share it so you can see it here. This is where I was at a few years ago for a conference at the Ukrainian Catholic University, and it's here, located here. And this is where Lviv is located, and it's not far from the. Oh, disappeared. But you can see Lviv is not far from Ukraine, from the Polish border, and this is where Ukrainian nationalism is most intense. And Kiev is the capital, is located here, and. What I wanted to highlight, what's going on now, is apparently the Russian government in Moscow is building up many forces, big forces on the border of Ukraine. So let me open that up and talk a bit about that. This is from New York Times current report. So let me again make sure you can share. You can see the screen. So I have to share the screen. And so this is the New York Times report from yesterday, right? The Russians the Russian army is built up 175,000 troops along the border of Ukraine, as right now, today. And what's going on here? And it says here the Biden administration's well, that's too slow. The Biden administration's growing alarm about a potential Russian invasion of Ukraine is based in part on U.S. intelligence that Moscow has drawn up plans for a military offensive involving estimated 175,000 troops as soon as early next year. An unclassified U.S. intelligence document details some of the intelligence findings, including the positioning of what officials say could eventually be 100 battalion to tactical groups, as well as heavy armor, artillery, and other equipment. So you might ask, why would the Russians want to invade Ukraine, given that America was defeated in Afghanistan? Isn't it very likely that Russia will face intense resistance and a costly resistance that will just drain Russia because they will never be able to conquer the area? No, because as we described earlier, Ukraine is a country whose borders were drawn in the 20th century. It was drawn in the 1920s after the Bolshevik Revolution. And it was drawn for various reasons. But the point is that Ukraine is not like, say, France. France is a nation state. Ukraine is not really a nation state. Ukraine is a multi-ethnic state. It's a post-colonial multi-ethnic state with Ukrainian nationalists, Russian nationalists, and other groups living there. But Ukrainian nationalists they of course love their state. They want an independent state for Ukrainian people, but many of the people living in Ukraine do not feel in their heart that they're Ukrainians. Or if they do, it's not their primary identity. Their primary identity is Russian. So, and as we talked about earlier, the fighting in Ukraine began in 2014 when, let me see if I can call up that Wikipedia page here. Yeah, when this person, and make sure you can see the screen, share the screen. And so this person was elected president of Ukraine in free and fair elections in 2000. In 2013, he was elected president of Ukraine, and he he ran for president, promising that if he became president, and he's known as somebody who's based in this area of Ukraine. This is where the Russian speaking and Russian feeling parts of Ukraine are concentrated here. And this area, of course, is now broken away. Parts of these areas have broken away from Ukraine. Russia annexed this territory in 2014. This area is where Viktor Yanukovych was based. He's got most of his support. He had least support up here, of course, in the areas where there are the most intense Ukrainian nationalists are located here. So he had promised when he was running for president that, yes, if I win and become president, we're going to sign a free trade agreement with the European Union. Yes, 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 yes. And then he won the election, and then he began negotiating with the European Union. And finally, at the last minute, he decided he was not going to sign the agreement with the European Union. And that led to uprisings in various places, including in Kiev against him, because he refused to sign a free trade agreement with the European Union. And of course, he was under intense economic pressure from Russia. Russia was cutting off economic support for Ukraine because, of course, the Ukrainian economy was still very much integrated with the Russian economy as a legacy of the Soviet Union, with factories supplying each other, railroads, roads, gas pipelines, all crossing this border. And so Ukrainian economy is still very much dependent and reliant upon supplies from Russia because of the legacy of the Soviet Union. But nevertheless, he refused to sign the free trade agreement, and that's when the uprising against him began. And when he was and of course, as I mentioned, Americans and Europeans, including Victoria Nuland was there at the. She actually flew to Ukraine and Kiev to encourage the uprising against Viktor Yanukovych, and she was in the Obama administration at the time, and now she's back in the Biden administration. She's got a promotion. She's Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. So she's back in there. And of course, the Russians are all very aware that she was there handing out food to the protesters protesting against Yanukovych. And so was John McCain. So you can see him here, this senator who ran for president and lost to Barack Obama in 2008. And he went to Kiev and said, yay! Protest, protest, and so did Herman van Rompuy, who was the president of the European Council, the first president of the European Council. He went to Kiev. He encouraged the protesters to protest against Viktor Yanukovych. He went there, a top official of the European Union. And so at this state, we see. This is to go back to the current report here. Remember, this is all an issue because the European Union got a Nobel Peace Prize in 2012 because it supposedly works for peace in Europe. And now we're on the brink of war, where apparently, what I think might well happen is that Russia is going to invade and annex the eastern part of Ukraine to Russia, like how the Serbs in Bosnia want to join Serbia. So these territories here, if Russia invades, it's going to try to annex this territory. Now the question is, how far is it going to go here? Is it going to annex Kiev? Kiev is, that's in terms of Russian nationalism. Crimea, I told you, is to Russians what Dok Island is to Koreans, right? These areas are predominantly Russian feeling or Russian speaking. Kiev is here. It's the capital of Ukraine. And Kiev has an ancient history as being part of Russian identity because the first Russian kingdoms, the first Slavic kingdoms were created. You can see the different spellings of it here. So make sure you can see that. Let me go here, screen share. So what is how much would Russia annex? Would Russia take all of this territory here? What east of this river? Would it take all of this? How would it try to take Kiev? That's the capital of Ukraine today, right? Lvov is here, way over here, right? Close to the border with Poland. And as I said, this is where Ukrainian nationalism is really intense and concentrated. So you can see here, I don't know, I haven't looked at this website before. This is, in a sense, this was the first capital of the Russian lands, of the Slavic lands 1,000 years ago. So the point is that Russian nationalism has a strong identity, not only with Crimea, but also with Kiev. Will they take half of Kiev? Will they try to take all of Kiev? I don't know. But remember, I think we talked about this earlier. Russia is a nation state. The Soviet Union was not a nation state, but Russia is a nation state, like China, like the United States, like Germany, like France. It's like Japan, it's a nation state. Like Poland, it's a nation state. And we talked about earlier, how do nation states behave? I think we opened this up before, and we talked about, when we say a country acts nationalistically, like Russia or China or United States, we talked previously about what is nationalist behavior, and one of the predispositions of a nation state is that it will let me see. A greater tendency will exist among the publics of nation states to show a motivational preoccupation with the objective of ingathering communities. In other words, Russians that are not inside Russia want to be part of Russia. Serbs are not part of Serbia, don't want to be part of Bosnia. They want to join, take their territory and join Serbia. China wants Taiwan because they think Taiwan is China, and that should be part of China, right? So this is the question about, is Russia really going to annex? I don't think Russia would try to conquer all of Ukraine. If they're going to invade, they're going to invade and take, if I can find it here, some portion of Ukraine. So let me, again, I have to keep redoing the screen share to look at this. And so we go here, and some portion of Ukraine. The question is how, so let me go back here to this exercise, and again, to reshare the the screen here. So, and so there's more discussion of this. We don't know what might happen. I mean, so my question to you is, please respond to the following statement. Moscow will soon invade Ukraine to partition it, break it up, and annex all of the eastern part of it to Russia, while leaving Western Ukraine to join NATO and the European Union if it chooses to do so. So that's my question to you. Do you think Russia is going to invade and annex the predominantly pro-Russian areas on the border with Russia of Ukraine? And probably not try to take all of Ukraine, because that's going to be a fight. That's going to be very costly and violent. The Lviv region. And so that's my question to you. So I would like you to, let me see how much time we have left. So let me ask you to join into, let me stop share and put you into breakout rooms, 2 groups, and create, join the groups. Oh, there's only, maybe I'll close the, okay, let me redo the groups, recreate, because there's only 3 people in the class. So what do you think? So let me create the groups. So please join the group. So Marie, Owen Tech, and UJE, respond. What do you think? Do you think that Russia is going to invade and break up Ukraine and add the eastern part to Russia? I mean, they've already added Crimea. They've added, Crimea is now part of Russia, according to Russian law, even if the United States and Western Europe does not recognize that. The European Union does not recognize that. They've encouraged Russian uprisings in the eastern part already in Luhansk and Donetsk region. Do you think that Russia is going to move to basically annex the pro-Russian parts of in eastern Ukraine to Russia? So Owen Tech and UJE, please join. And Marie, since you are our resident West European, let me see who's going to speak. Let me flip a coin here. So heads is Marie, and it's heads. So Marie, yes, you will speak for the group. Do you think? Please respond to the statement. Russia will soon invade Ukraine and break it up and add the eastern part to Russia and let the western part to do whatever it wants to do, basically become its own separate new state with the capital in Lviv. In Polish, it's Lviv. In Ukrainian, it's Lviv. There's a German word for it too. What was it in German? Liebeck. No, let me see. Let me find it here. I can't remember the German name for Lviv. I think it was Liebeck. Yeah, well, I can't. There's a German word for it, but it's pronounced differently in different languages. So, let's see. Oh, this is Ukrainian Catholic University. This is where I was at. Yeah, this is the place I was at the. So I'll close the room here, but just to show you, this is the place where I was at a conference a few years ago. So the Ukrainian Catholic University, and part of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, and very nice building, and they have a website. Of course, everybody's got a website. And let's see what does it have here. Yeah, so there you see. Okay. So there you see it's in the Ukrainian language, which is, and that's the president, and he's an American Ukrainian Catholic bishop. Okay, so where does your group fit on this scale, Marie?
I'm not really sure, but I think they will invade Ukraine.
Yeah. Keep in mind, I mean, fighting is intensifying. Already at least 10,000 people have died. More than that, probably, because that information is old. Over 1 million refugees. Keep in mind, last time I checked, you know where most of those refugees went? Those people that fled the fighting in eastern Ukraine, they had a choice of where to choose to go, right? They could have gone west towards Western Ukraine or Poland or somewhere, or they could have gone to Russia. And the overwhelming majority of those refugees who fled the fighting that began in 2014, 7 years ago, the overwhelming majority went to Russia. They didn't go west. They didn't go to Poland. They went to Russia, which tells you something about how those people feel in eastern Ukraine. Not everybody, right? So, and of course, this all began with Ukraine overthrowing the Viktor Yanukovych, the pro-Russian president of Ukraine, whose support is concentrated in eastern Ukraine, and that's and then with the encouragement of the European Union and the United States government, encouraging that uprising against Yanukovych. And now where, I mean, the CIA and others are predicting that the Russians are going to, we don't know what they're planning to do, but I would expect that they're going to try to annex the eastern parts of Ukraine that they view as basically Russia, that the communists created this thing, Ukraine, and it was created as an artificial state to weaken Russia because Russia's too big and strong, and it made other nations in the Soviet Union fearful that of the Soviet Union being a Russian version, a new version of the Russian Empire. So they drew these boundaries in part, and this is true in Yugoslavia as well. They drew the boundaries of those republics in Yugoslavia and those republics in the Soviet Union, the republics in Yugoslavia in the 1940s and the republics of the Soviet Union in the 1920s, partly because Russia and Serbia were both too big. And so you had to try to convince Ukrainians, Georgians, Armenians in the Soviet Union that the Soviet Union is not basically a secret version, neo-colonial version of the Russian Empire. Because so you have to reduce the political power of Russia in the Soviet Union. So for example, until 1990, the early 1990s, Russia was not allowed to have a communist party in the Soviet Union. In the old Soviet Union, there was no Russian Communist Party. In the old Soviet Union, there was a Ukrainian Communist Party, there was a Kyrgyz Communist Party, there was an Uzbek Communist Party, there was a Kazakh Communist Party, an Armenian Communist Party, a Georgian Communist Party, a Latvian Communist Party, an Estonian Communist. They all had communist parties, but Russia was not allowed to have a Russian Communist Party in the Soviet Union. Why? To try to persuade Ukrainians, Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, Estonians, Latvians, Belarusians that the Soviet Union is not a new version of a Russian Empire. And so they drew these boundaries between Ukraine and Belarus and Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, partly with that in mind, that they had to counterbalance Russia. They had to politically counterbalance Russia and persuade the people living in the Soviet Union that the Soviet Union is not a new and improved version of the Russian Empire. And so that's the view of people like Vladimir Putin, that this thing, Ukraine, that's not a real state. That's an artificial thing that was created. It's not, there's no history to it. It's not real. It's something that is artificial. It's not like Poland. It's not like Germany. It's not like France. It's not like Italy. It's not a nation state. It's more like a post-colonial state in Africa with arbitrary boundaries drawn by outsiders. And given that the economy is not doing so well in Russia, Putin, like we talked about earlier, these different countries, these different actors, these leaders of countries will try to compensate for decline in the economy by trying to appeal to nationalism. Right. So, like we talked about earlier, in briefly in other classes, that if the economy, utilitarian control is declining, then political leaders of a state have to respond by compensating with the decline of the economy by appealing to patriotism or upping coercion and fear and terror to control the people. So, Putin, the only way that Russia will give up Crimea is if there's a revolution in Russia. And Putin, remains popular in Russia because he's seen, rightly or wrongly, as standing up for and defending Russian national interests in the world against the United States and the European Union. The European Union. So then let's go back then to the votes here, and let me ask you to vote on whether or not you think Moscow, please respond to this statement. Moscow will soon invade Ukraine to partition it and annex all of the eastern part of it to Russia, leaving Western Ukraine to join NATO and European Union if it chooses to do so. So please vote. Please vote. Marie, Hoontek, UJE. Please vote. Oh, 3 of you. Neutral cannot decide. Oh, really? You're neutral, cannot decide? By the way, you know, I am reading reports that the effort to finalize the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline from Russia, the sea pipeline that goes under the ocean to Germany has been stopped, that they're not completing it. So, I mean, again, the whole motivation for me bringing this up is that, again, the European Union is supposed to be a peace strategy for Europe. It got the Nobel Peace Prize 9 years ago. But we have a war that began in 2014, 2 years after the European Union got the Nobel Peace Prize. In 2014 and 15, we saw a new war break out in Europe and Ukraine. And it looks like this war is going to escalate. Okay, so let me go back here. Yeah.
Professor, I chose neutral and cannot decide because I don't know President Putin's real intention is what is President Putin's real intention is. So I choose this one.
Well, he's saying what he wants is he wants guarantees that Ukraine will never join NATO, that Ukraine will never, and therefore never join the European Union. That the United States will not sell advanced weapons or not provide advanced military weapons to Ukraine. So let's look at what he's saying, right? This is what he's saying, that I think there's some reference here that Putin is now saying publicly that he wants guarantees that the United States will never, Ukraine will never be able to join NATO or European Union, or at least NATO. I mean, that's what he's been saying. And that there will not be Western forces stationed in Ukraine, you know, American soldiers or Polish soldiers will not be stationed in Ukraine. He's making these kinds of statements. Is it all just basically bargaining leverage? Again, we're not really certain what's going on. The United States and the European Union are threatening Russia with more economic sanctions. It says here, the Biden administration has declared an ironclad commitment to Ukraine's borders and independence, but it's not really, well, it's not reversed Russia's annexation of Crimea and its support for separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk region of Ukraine. Yeah, so now again, I mean, to defend Ukrainian nationalists, you know, they say, of course we want to join European Union. Of course we want to. We want our country to become a prosperous, non-corrupt country that will reform and democratize, that will have the rule of law, that will end corruption. We want to fix our country. That means we want to Europeanize our country, which means we want to join the European Union and become a modern, prosperous, democratic, non-corrupt, a country that is not characterized by terrible corruption. Russia and Ukraine as well are incredibly corrupt. As I said, I mean, it basically, you know, the mafia, it's an organized crime state. These people steal from the government. The leaders, they kill human journalists who report on their corruption in various forms over the years. Various journalists have been murdered in Russia. Of course, we don't want to be part of that, the Ukrainian nationalists would say. Of course, we want to join the European Union. We want to become like Germany. We want to become prosperous and peaceful and democratic with a state that's no longer characterized by this terrible corruption. Of course, what's wrong with that? So that's where we stand right now. And so in the time remaining, you know, I guess we only have a few minutes left. in terms of the common foreign security policy, we didn't really have a lot of time to talk about this. The European common foreign security policy really got a lot of emphasis, a lot more focus of the European Union to develop a European common foreign security policy as a consequence of the perceived failures to prevent war from breaking out in Yugoslavia 30 years ago. And then it got more support with the poor behavior of the European Union in opposing the United States and its intervention in Iraq in 2003. But the European Union's common foreign security policy is really not going to rely upon military force. It relies primarily upon economic tools. And that's why the High Representative of the Common Foreign Security Policy is also the Vice President of the European Commission, which is overwhelmingly focused upon the trade and economic issues of the European Union. Not only, but mostly. So that's the tools that they have to use in trying to persuade Russia. It's not by sending a European military to help the Ukrainians fight. That's not going to happen. I don't see who's going to send, nobody's going to, no European or American military is going to go into Ukraine to fight Russians if the Russians invade. I don't think so. They might aid and support Ukrainian nationalists, Ukrainian patriots, like they supported, the Kosovo Liberation Army 25 years ago in Kosovo, in Serbia among the Albanians, or support the Kurds, the way they supported the Kurds in Iraq and Syria, but they're not going to send their own soldiers, at least not officially. They might send them in private, secretly, as covert operations soldiers, which they are doing. I mean, they sent American covert operations forces to fight in Iraq and Syria with the Kurds, but they're not officially going to send in the American or the Polish or the German or the French or the European military to fight the Russians if they invade Ukraine. They'll put economic sanctions on Ukraine, on Russia, sorry. So, so this has become more of a strong focus, but it's just sad that given the fact that the European Union is supposed to be a peace strategy for Europe, we see a new war emerging in Ukraine, partly because again and this came up with this conference I attended over the last few weeks, right? That European Union is seen as one side of the same coin. On one side is European Union, and the other side is NATO. And they're inseparable in the views of people in Eastern Europe and also apparently in Moscow. The European Union and NATO are one and the same. And the way that the European Union and American diplomats behaved in overthrowing the democratically elected president of Ukraine through encouraging an uprising by the Ukrainian patriots against Yanukovych, Viktor Yanukovych, I mean, that was, for Putin and his ruling group in Moscow, that just reaffirmed that you can't really separate European Union from NATO. And the notes from chapter 15, which were written from last week, right? The Maastricht Treaty officially agreed on a common foreign security policy from 1992, but it's again, it's a security policy, foreign security policy that's based primarily upon use of economic incentives and tools and instruments. There has been some effort to try to create a European military, in 1992, the old Western European Union, which was the predecessor to NATO and then just became a dormant actor, was reinvigorated and adopted the so-called Petersburg tasks. And the Petersburg tasks of the European Union would develop a military capabilities for humanitarian intervention, for rescuing people, and peacekeeping, not peacemaking, peacekeeping. I'm sorry, and other crisis management operations, including peacemaking, which is a problematic term because that means if you're going to make peace, you're going to have to identify somebody as the bad guy. And if you make the Serbs the bad guy or the Russians the bad guy, you're going to encourage resistance, nationalist resistance. So that's problematic. There was an experimental Franco-German brigade was formed in 1991. It converted to Eurocorps, but I never hear anything really being done with it. And the European Union's military capabilities are primarily focused upon humanitarian interventions in Africa and elsewhere. Once the fighting among groups in Africa, for example, they want a ceasefire, the European Union comes in and polices the ceasefire. It's a neutral force that is supposed to monitor to make sure the two sides or more than two sides who are agreed to a ceasefire are obeying the terms of the ceasefire, just by monitoring. And then, of course, also providing relief services once they provide security. In 1999, the European Union launched its European Security and Defense Policy, which again was supposed to create, emphasize more of a developing the military capabilities of the European Union, but that's never really gone very far, despite their periodic commitment to doing that, to implementing that. Okay, that's all we have for today. And so you can see here's the European Union peacekeeping operations in Africa and elsewhere, some activity in Ukraine here. And so that's where we stand today. Okay, so I will start meeting with some of you this week, today, in fact. Okay, so that's all for today. And unless anybody has a question, I'm going to end the meeting. Okay, bye.